So if we can, let's see if we can just take this for a few minutes. Like, I'm going to go just a bunch of steps deeper, okay? Let's go step one deeper, okay? Ready? So to get why that's true, let's see if we can identify what are the generator functions. And again, I'm going to ask you to listen with your mind, but also stop thinking. Do you get the paradox? Right? And there's a place that, right? So let's feel together. We're music, and we're playing a symphony together. Okay? Okay, so let's play the symphony. So there's this place where we need to identify, and we need to cut through all of the headlines and all of the analysis and get underneath the whole thing and say, what are the actual generator functions? You get what I mean by a generator function? It generates. It's the underlying generator function. Is that word okay? Flemish? We okay? You get what I right? What's the generator function of existential risk? So the best analysis, until several years ago, that I came up with together with Barbara Marx Hubbard, with Zach, my brother Daniel, right? But the best analysis we came up with, and this we were working with at the think tank, was the following. And I think that it's exactly half right, okay? But the best analysis we came up with is that there are two generator functions for existential risk. And this was, you know, after combing and trying to actually see through infrared glasses all of the headlines. And what we're going to say is exactly right, it's just insufficient. So the first generator function is the failed story that we live in. And I thought about this. This is actually how I first met Barbara. She came to join, and my friend Daniel came to join, when I did an event with a close friend who was the board chair of the center for several years, and is now on our board again, right, who's a grocery, started a little grocery called Whole Foods, right, and we ran an event called Success 3.0. And the point of Success 3.0 was about existential risk. And it was about what's the success story we live in today? And we called that success story Success 2.0. Success 1.0, pre-modern, do what God says, obey it well, and you shall be redeemed. And Spinoza analyzes, spends a good part of his life critiquing, living in Amsterdam. That didn't go well, right? Critiquing, right, that success story, okay? So that's Success 1.0. Success 2.0 is modernity. And what's Success 2.0? And pretty much all of modernity, from Xi to Putin, right, to Obama, to Biden, everyone lives in some version of this story everywhere. And the success story is rivalrous conflict. There's a rival. You know the word rival? Rivalrous conflict governed by win-lose metrics. And rivalrous conflict governed by win-lose metrics drives everything. Every company, every division, right? Every structure of society. And remember what we said yesterday, that there are billions of micro acts in society driven by the hidden story. Remember that from yesterday? So the hidden story is, am I successful? Right? Now in the room, let's just stay with this for a second, okay? Let's be really brutally honest with each other, right? We talk about lots of other things, but when we think of ourselves, right, we want to look good to ourselves and to the world, and we want to be successful. And, you know, often one of the ways we give it away in culture is when we say someone's very sincere, it's like a booby prize for not being successful. Oh, yes, he's very sincere, right? He's very sincere, right? Or about a woman, she's a very devoted wife. We mean she's somehow not successful in whatever our standard of beauty happens to be. Or he's somehow not successful. He's sincere. He's devoted. But he's very kind, right? But success lives and breathes us. Right? We're taught to be successful. Right? And our entire society, the entire school system is organized to train in commodified units people to participate successfully in the workforce. That's literally the entire school system that was developed in the last 200 years is about that. And Comenius tried to argue for a different vision, right? An early Renaissance figure, We didn't go with him. We went with a different school system. Right? So everything is about success. And even if we have all sorts of other hobbies, we go away for nice weekends and we fight. But in the end, the cores have got to be successful. And that's a driver of reality in every nation, in every city, in every company, between every city, right, every place, everywhere. Right? So it's rivalrous conflict governed by win-lose metrics. Now, that generates a self-terminating system. A system that self-terminates. You create exponential growth curves, which always drop off. You create fractional reserve banking, which is a deceptive system that in the end will crash. Right? You create an extraction model from planet Earth, right, which extracts and extracts and extracts until actually the systems crash, which they're on the verge of crashing. And then all of a sudden, systems crash and banks crash, and you can't get a loan anymore, right? And you can't get a job anymore. And right, in other words, and I described in great detail the next 30, 40 years based on an intense economic analysis a year ago. I won't go into it again, right? But it's a fundamental cascading crash of systems, whether it's over the next 30 years, 50 years, 70 years is debatable, but that's absolutely where the cascading crash is going. Because the system is driven by exponential growth curves that have to drop off, right? By extraction models, right, that have to collapse, by fractional reserve banking that cannot sustain itself, if you actually understand how it's actually working. And we think it's going to keep going around, and it won't. And COVID was just a dress rehearsal. It was a minor dress rehearsal, right, for the structural weakness in the system. So that's the first generator function, right? Success 2.0. So what we said 7 years ago is we've got to move to success 3.0. It's a new vision of success. So bracket that. What's the second generator function? So the second generator function is really important, and it's talked about by people like David Snowden, right, at Harvard. It's talked about by Nassim Taleb. It's talked about in different ways by pretty much every decent systems theorist, right, who's actually looking at the world. But the distinction they draw when you use Snowden's term, because then again he gets half the story, is between what he calls a complicated system and a complex system. You with me? So what's a complex system? A complex system takes care of its own waste. It regenerates itself. There's a general interconnected balance in the system. Think Brazilian rainforest. Brazilian rainforest, complex system. It regenerates, takes care of its own waste, right? Everything is interpenetrated with everything else, and there's this very deep cascading set of intimacies, if you will, right, throughout the system. A complicated system, think Ferrari. What's a Ferrari? So a Ferrari fits together, but if you're missing a part and the factory closes, you're fucked. Because a Ferrari doesn't actually regenerate itself, right? It doesn't actually fit together essentially, right? It's a Lego piece that we've put together, right? That's dependent, it's very fragile, and if it breaks, you need a very specific part, and if you can't replace it. So a complicated system has become, for example, the world economic system. The world economic system is a complicated system, what we now call a hyperobject, in which, for example, we create financial instruments, right, in one discrete subset of subunits in a particular company, and those financial instruments are meant for that particular subunit of that company, right, to win in its rivalrous conflict, right, and its win-lose metrics, and then that financial instrument cascades through the system and causes a complete meltdown in 2008, for example. If you actually trace the financial instruments that were created that then cascaded through, right, the housing market. That was a minor meltdown that was artificially solved. But a hyperobject means that the pieces of the system don't know each other. They're all operating independently based on rivalrous conflict governed by win-lose metrics, and then they generate a complicated system, or what Taleb calls a fragile system. A fragile system. So there's one person here from Italy I see. The amount of people who died in Italy, doctors and nurses, because they couldn't get fucking masks in the beginning of COVID. And you know why they couldn't get masks? Because the contracts were structured in such a way that only particular people were allowed to make masks, right, based on an entire set of very, very interesting structural contracts. And so literally Italy and the United States, The greatest industrial giant in the world, for 6 months, tens of thousands of people died because there were no fucking masks. Meaning the United States couldn't generate masks. It's kind of unimaginable, right? It's an unimaginable, right? In other words, the system's a complicated, fragile system that optimizes not for safety, not for resiliency, not for wholeness, not for life. The system optimizes for short-term success, which is driven by rivalrous conflict, governed by win-lose metrics in its short-term structures. Wow. Right? So we identified, quite brilliantly, thank you, right, those two things, right, as the generator function for existential risk, and we were partially wrong in a really big way because we didn't go deep enough. But we're really proud of ourselves. It was accurate, but it didn't cut to it. Because actually, what's the root cause? Those are both exactly right, but stay close now, friends, okay? And now it gets tender, it gets so humble, and it gets so desperate in a certain sense, right? What's the underlying root cause, friends, right, for those generator functions? And here I want to introduce a term that we've thrown around over the years, but I want to try and get really specific about it. So the underlying root cause of those two generator functions is what we might call a global intimacy disorder. That actually those generator functions are not root cause. That under those generator functions, there's actually a global intimacy disorder. And let's see if we can just look at it for a second. So in terms of rivalrous conflict, you see it obviously, right? There's me and you. We're not intimate with each other, right? And we're going to talk about intimacy a little later, but for now, let's just talk about the beginning of what we call the intimacy formula. Intimacy equals shared identity, right? So we're not intimate with each other. We're in rivalrous conflict. We're at odds with each other by definition, all the way up and all the way down the system, meaning every single person I meet, I am optimizing or sub-optimizing my relationship to them based on some version of rivalrous conflict, and it's always at play in every relationship. Buber called it I-it, right? But in other words, it's a fundamental intimacy disorder at the very heart of culture. And then a complicated system means that the parts of the system can't see each other. Do you get that? And it's the parts of the system don't have any shared identity. They can't see each other. They don't know each other. There's no carnal knowledge. There's no fuck running through the system. There's no currency of Eros, that actually the parts of the system are all sub-optimizing, right, to their own rivalrous conflict. They can't see each other or feel each other. There's no mutuality of recognition. There's no mutuality of pathos. They can't feel each other. There's no mutuality of purpose, and there's not a shared field of value. So there's no shared identity, right, which are all dimensions, as we'll see, of intimacy. Right, so there's this fundamental, both in a complicated system, right, and in a rivalrous conflict governed by win-lose metrics. Both of those are actually expressions, does that make sense, everyone, of an underlying intimacy disorder. Now, that's actually very hopeful. That's actually great news. So all of a sudden, it gets really hopeful. So this is now, we're going from here on in, we're going into radical, this is fantastic. We're going to radical goodness. Right? Actually, this is great. Do you get how hopeful this is? In other words, and its diagnosis is everything. Who's our favorite television character from Great Britain? House, right? What does House do? He's obnoxious about everything else, but he's very good at diagnosis. Right? How many people know House? House from right? House, right? So diagnosis is everything. And it's if we can actually identify not just the generator functions, but the underlying root cause. So that's an enormous, enormous opening of hope, because what it means is, it's beautiful, right? It's beautiful. What it means is we can actually, right? And you got to, at this point, you got to let the contraction go, let the egoic structures go. You know, if you want to, argue with the analysis, do it later. It's accurate. Let's get to the global intimacy disorder. And why is that hopeful? It's hopeful because it means that we have a way through. And what's the way through? The way through is not a restoration of intimacy, because we've never had global intimacy before, right? So we can't restore intimacy. Does everyone get that? There's no intimacy. We've never done this before. But we can evolve intimacy. And an evolution of intimacy means we can actually generate a new structure of intimacy, an evolutionary intimacy, which actually drives the entire system and its billions of microacts in a new way. Now, bracket for a second what that might be. Bracket for a second what that might be. Bracket that for a second. We'll get back to it.